Hello everybody, I'm Yang. Welcome to Tea House, China Radio International's online video talk show. Today we will have a cup of tea with Jill Collins, the Australian Embassy's Counselor of Public Affairs and Culture. She will talk about Year of Chinese Culture in Australia from 2011 to 2012. Hi Colin, welcome to our program.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now I would like to make a tea for you.
It sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
It's Huangshan Maofeng. Have you tried before?
No, I'm not sure. Perhaps not.
First, I will invite you to have a look at the tea.
Okay. Oh, it's very delicate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. So, do you know what this called?
No. Oh, okay. Gaiwar.
It looks like very fresh tea.
Mm-hmm. All kinds of tea can be made in gaiwar. Actually, it's a very useful instrument because for different kinds of tea, we should have different kinds of instrument. But this one is very good one.
So it keeps the tea warm while it's infusing the flavour.
Clever. I think you're an expert of Chinese culture, huh?
Not at all.
You Imagine Australia, the Year of Australian Culture to China, was successfully launched last year.
That's right.
And Experience China, the Year of Chinese Culture in Australia, will take place from 2011 to 2012 and has already been launched.
Yes.
What is the most thrilling part of this cultural event?
Well, this is a bilateral cultural program. So we've already completed the first year, which is Australia and China. So now we're very excited to be working with the Chinese government to help them to present their Year of Culture in Australia. And there's already been quite a few really exciting events that they've held in different cities in Australia. So in June, at the end of June, the Chinese Minister for, the Vice Minister for Culture actually visited Sydney and took part in the opening of Experience China, the Year of Chinese Culture. There was a fantastic performance in Sydney of a show called The Legend of Shangri-La. So it was really showcasing Chinese culture. And there have also been some events since then. I think that Lang Lang has played some recitals in Australia, and there have been some other events coming up soon. There's a bilateral literature forum that will focus on letting Australians learn about Chinese writers and Chinese literature. That's happening, I think, this month. Later in the year, there's going to be some really wonderful performing arts shows.
The name of the activity is called Experience China. What do you think the audience and the people of our two nations can experience about Chinese culture?
I think they can experience a real mixture of Chinese culture that they've never seen before. This is what we were also trying to do with our Year of Culture in China. We were trying to show the Chinese people both the ancient, the traditional Australia, like Indigenous arts, for example, but also to show them the modern side of Australia, so innovative, clever digital arts and modern music and things like that. So what the Chinese Ministry of Culture is also trying to do, and they've done a wonderful job, is to balance their program between the more traditional Chinese arts and culture that people already are more familiar with. So traditional painting, classical music or ancient Chinese music, perhaps some Peking opera, that kind of thing, and then balance it against the really contemporary, more edgy modern China, which I think in Australia less people are familiar with. So I think that one of the great things that will come out of this program is that people will see all the new aspects of life in China, new artists, new performers, and see how they're working with Australian artists and performers and creating something new.
When mentioning about Chinese culture, a lot of people, especially foreigners, will think of Kung Fu, Panda, Beijing Opera.
Yes.
Besides all these things, what other practices or traditions do you think can best demonstrate Chinese culture in your eyes?
Sure. Well, to be honest, I think those things are still very important symbols of Chinese culture. So when you ask most people, including myself, what sums up the essence of Chinese culture, obviously those traditions that go back thousands of years are still really important today, and in many ways they're resurging, because I think Chinese people today, including young people, they realise the significance of maintaining their cultural roots. Because while we must keep up with the world and progress, at the same time we need to respect our ancient traditions, because that reminds us of who we are. So I think the things that you mentioned, like the Peking opera or different styles of opera, different regional operas in China are really, really famous and well known everywhere. Of course, Chinese calligraphy is another really important aspect of culture, because not only is it an art form, but it also reflects history, and you can find out a lot about ancient history and people's lives in the past. So it's like a learning tool as well as a beautiful thing to see. And of course, stunning watercolour paintings and ink paintings are also another very, well recognised symbol of Chinese culture. Yeah, so there are many different pandas. And of course, another thing is Chinese cuisine. Yeah, because I think food is a really important part of culture, right?
Which kind of dishes do you like best?
Well, I like spicy food, so my favourite cuisine is probably Hunan and Sichuan cuisine.
And can you make that?
I do try. There are some dishes that I've tried to cook. For example, yuxiang rouse and jingdou paigu and so on.
What about seafood?
And seafood, yes, actually we have wonderful seafood in Australia, so I love to take our fresh prawns and other seafood and make it into a spicy Sichuan dish with chilies.
That must be very delicious.
It's not too bad.
In addition to food, what about drinks? Coffee or tea? Which do you prefer?
Well, I very, very seldom drink coffee. I actually started my life as a tea drinker because my parents were tea drinkers. So I've kept that tradition through my life, and later I moved to Chinese tea. So I try to drink Chinese tea as much as I can because it's very good for you.
Okay, now let's have a rest and have a cup of Chinese tea.
Okay.
And after that, we will talk about 2011 Expo of Chinese Tea.
Sure.
Well, to help more Australian people to know about Chinese tea, and there is an expo called the 2011 Chinese Tea Expo will be held in October this year. Can you explain more about this?
Sure. The China Tea Expo is another part of the Experience China program that's been arranged by the Chinese Ministry of Culture. And my understanding is that it's a special event that will help Australian people to understand better the links that Chinese people have to their tea and why it's so important to them, and how it links with Chinese culture and history and tradition, because drinking tea is a tradition that goes back thousands of years in China, right? Yes. Yeah. So it's really intended to let people in Australia better understand the closeness of the Chinese people to tea, but also apart from the cultural element, it's also, of course, meant to stimulate, commercial interest in more commercial interest in Chinese tea in Australia, because there is growing interest in Chinese tea. The market is rising quite quickly, so I think those are the main aims of that event.
What kind of Chinese tea is the most popular in Australia?
Well, I think you can buy most of the major varieties of Chinese tea. A lot of it is packaged in a generic way. It's just marketed as green tea. But you can buy oolong tea, you can buy teahouse17 tea, you can also buy the flower teas like chrysanthemum, jasmine, those kinds of teas. And now in some specialist shops you can buy the even better varieties like pu'er tea you can also get now. So a whole range of different styles of tea.
Well, is Chinese tea considered as a luxury product in Australia or a common product?
I think these days it's not regarded as a luxury product anymore. I think it's very affordable. More and more people are drinking it.
And how many tea houses are there in Australia?
I'm sure that the number of tea houses is growing, but I remember a few years ago when I was in Sydney, I visited Sydney, and there was a lovely place called the Chinese Garden in Sydney, and it's right next to the harbour, so it's a beautiful spot, and they had a lovely tea house inside, and I remember sitting there and relaxing and enjoying the atmosphere.
Okay, now let's have another cup of tea and move on to our next topic of the cultural exchanges of our two countries.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay. Okay, Jill, welcome back. I know that you're involved in both the Year of Australian Culture in China and the Chinese culture in Australia. What impressed you most?
Well, both of the years have had wonderful highlights that I've really enjoyed. From the point of view of the Australian Year of Culture, we held a lot of major events that touched a lot of people. For example, when we first launched our year, we had a wonderful concert attended by our Governor-General from Australia, who travelled up specially for it, and it wasn't an ordinary concert because it featured a lot of young Australian artists. A lot of them were Indigenous Australians, and so when they performed, it really, you could feel that was coming from their heart, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed that very much. And it also showed the multiculturalism of Australia, many different performers from different ethnic backgrounds. So it actually made me feel quite homesick. But it was a lovely event, and there have been lots of events like that as well.
What do you think the performances that are given by Chinese performers can really surprise or touch Australian audience?
Well, I understand that there's a lot of interest in the upcoming performances in September of Rhinoceros in Love, which is a modern theatre production, which is, I think the theme is really about young people experiencing love and the things that they go through. And so it's a really modern theme. It's a theme that everyone can understand and relate to. But most of all, it's from people, I haven't seen it yet, but I really want to see it. I've heard that it's just a fantastic production, and the performers are amazing, and I'm sure that that is going to be a real highlight for the Australian people, and people are queuing up to get tickets. So it's going to be one of the big shows. I think it will play in several different cities, different festivals around Australia.
Well, Jill, you started to study Chinese in 1980s, when not a lot of Australian people know about Chinese language and
That's
culture.
right.
And how do you think that learning Chinese language and culture help you to better understanding this country?
Definitely. I think that you can still come to China and learn about China. I think if you study the Chinese language, you really get a much better understanding about the way people think, about people's customs and traditions, how they behave. So starting point for me was to learn Chinese language. And I also learned a bit of history, a bit of culture.
Can you say something to the audience in Chinese?
CRI 观众你们好。